you can choose unfair peace, or you can fight for fairness of the land. I mean, you can choose whichever you want. But sometimes unfair peace is probably...
Okay, so there are two hidden false assumptions here. The first false assumption is that the fairness in terms of land is on the side of the Palestinians. The second assumption, there's even more false, is that this is about land at all, and this is about fairness at all, and jihad has nothing to do with it.
Peace is probably better.
If you were a Palestinian living in Gaza and you were young, you would have joined Hamas in all likelihood.
Saying that if you were born in Gaza, you would have automatically joined Hamas, and that's just a natural thing to do, is exactly like saying that if you were born in Nazi Germany, you would have become a Nazi, and you would have felt it's unfair, and your country doesn't have enough living space, and these laws that are inferior to you, then they're supposed to be your slaves, but they're not, so you're going to automatically become a Nazi. Now, actually it might be true for many people, it might be true for even most people, but there are two problems with this. One, it's not true for everyone. And these people who it's not true for, and they decide they don't want to be shaheeds, they don't want their kids to be indoctrinated into being shaheeds, they don't want to die killing innocent people, babies in their cribs, or mutilating and raping women, then these people actually deserve protection more than the ones that are terrorists, and more than you, who have nothing to do with the conflict. Even if you ignore these people, let's say even everybody does that, then does it make it the right thing to do? Does it make it the right thing to be a Nazi if you were born in Nazi Germany, or even if you feel this is fair? Does it make it the right thing to be a terrorist? No, it doesn't. It doesn't make it moral, or it doesn't make it right, just because if someone was born in some place, then they would be likely to do that.
Likelihood.
I understand.
You would have rebelled.
Listen, John,
And if your family owned property that was now part of Israel, you would want that property back. You would view it as your property, right? But you want to...
Okay, there are three problems with this argument, and I'll try to make it short. The first one is when you say, quote unquote, land that belonged to your family. Most of this land was sold by Arabs, and it was bought by Jews between 1900 and 1948. So before 1948, there was no war of independence, there was no Nakba, nothing that people had to flee their homes, even if it was their fault. It just didn't happen. Now, the second problem, when you say not long ago, actually it is long ago. 75 years to 80 years is quite long ago. Many millions of people were displaced at this time. That includes also Jews, many hundreds of thousands of Jews who had to leave their homes and their property in all of the Arab countries, and also in Europe. And the third problem, which is the biggest problem, it is not exclusive from becoming a terrorist. So it's not like you can say something happened to me or to somebody in my family 2 generations ago, or 80 years ago, or 75 years ago, and now it's justified for me to become a terrorist.
John Mearsheimer makes a statement that if you had lost land or you had lost property, would you not want it back? Under what conditions was this land or property lost? Some of the land prior to the formation of the State of Israel, the formal formation, was sold to Jews, which is why they were living there, even while it was still under the British Empire's control. Some of the property or land was lost because some of the Arabs living in the area were told by the Arab armies that were attacking or going to attack after the formation of the state that they should leave. And once all the Jews had been killed, they could go back to their homes. And I again ask you, under what conditions was the land lost? Under what conditions was the property lost? Is a sale of land a loss or a legal transfer? If you left because you knew that all the Jews would have been slaughtered and killed, and that didn't happen, under what conditions did you lose your property?
Likelihood.
I understand.
You would have rebelled.
Listen, John,
And if your family owned property that was now part of Israel, you would want that property back. You would view it as your property, right? But you want to understand that this land, not too long ago, belonged to the Palestinians.
But these things happen all the time in history, John.
You can't make that. Of course
they do. People get displaced, and I'm not saying it's fair, but don't. At some point, you kind of, just like with Ukraine, at some point they're going to have to accept what is.
Mearsheimer says, but you understand that this land not that long ago belonged to the Palestinians. So first, 75 to 80 years ago is long ago. Many populations had land that they no longer have 75 years ago. Many Germans that were in Poland, in Danzig, in Sudetenland, in many other places, they don't have this land anymore. Many Jews that were in the Arab countries or in Europe had land at exactly that time, or maybe 5 years before that. They don't have this land and they accept it. Now, one difference between them and the Palestinians is when we say not long ago, that is 75, 80 years ago, and some of them even longer, then how long did they have this land before that? Now, and you can look at the group of people who, by the way, they were not Palestinians then, they called themselves Arabs, and the Arab identity is a strong one anyway, and they were living as clans. So let's say some clan or some family in a clan, they had land, then they didn't have it for generations before that. They had it for 20 years, sometimes even 40 years. But the time they had this land is shorter than the time that's passed since then.
It's happened all the time in history, John.
You can't make that. Of
but
course
they do. People get displaced, and I'm not saying it's fair, but don't. At some point, you kind of, just like with Ukraine, at some point they're going to have to accept what is. And it's the same in Israel. I'm sorry. I don't think it's that different.
They're not going to accept it. That's quite clear.
Exactly. But I'm saying, like, okay, but then you
again,
can have...
that's why the Israelis want to drive them out.
I wouldn't say it's just like Ukraine. When you're looking at Ukraine, there are two fundamental differences. One, the Ukrainians did not start a war on the premise of the idea that they need to displace Russia and replace them as the only nation on this territory. They were also not launching rockets at civilian populations in Moscow before the war started. That's one difference. Second difference is the Ukrainians, whether they can accept a quote-unquote unfair solution, is a more complicated question than for the Gazans, because what does it mean? The war started from the side of the Russians. What it means is they're going to continue oppressing Ukraine as much as they can, as long as Ukraine is not the same as Russia. And because the Ukrainians do not want to live like the Russians, then saying, okay, we're going to accept an unfair solution, it means also we're going to accept Russia staying there and continuing to try to do that and probably starting another war in a few years.